Good morning, guys, and welcome. So today is Tuesday. I'm going to move you a little bit. Today is Tuesday. Hi, going for a ride. And we're going to be looking at Obama's presidency, the beginning, yeah? Because as we left off yesterday, he had just been elected, 2008, to the office of president. Okay, so right now we're going to cover pages 431 to 433. Okay, I hope you guys can see it. So I keep moving you a little closer. Okay. All right. So one of the first things you do as president, any president, no matter who you are, is you start assembling your cabinet. Remember, we talked about cabinet. The cabinet is not the kitchen cabinets in your kitchen, or they are people who help you make decisions as president. So that is the very first thing most people do once they find out they're elected president. So Obama was no different. He grabbed some cabinet members. Now, these are not anywhere near all the cabinet members that there are. If you were in my third grade class, you remember we looked at how many cabinet members presidents in the past have had and how many cabinet members presidents today have. So we actually had looked at President Obama in our lessons in third grade and found out how many cabinet members he has. And we also discovered that the cabinet member numbers keep going up, okay? We talked about George Washington had I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 right now because both numbers are flying around in my head. But now there's tons and tons, and they keep adding more departments, which adds more cabinet members. So we are only going to talk about 3 cabinet members that Obama had. Okay, and again, I have my notes and so I make sure that you know everything, that I don't forget anything. All right. So one of the biggest issues that Obama felt he had at the time was the economy. Remember, banks were failing and car companies were failing before President Bush's term ended, and that did not fix itself. Okay. So he decided, Obama, to go with Timothy I had it before I started this. Gaithner? I don't know. Like I said, I had his name running around in my head. Now it just fell out. And he was the Secretary of the Treasury. Okay. So the next cabinet member was Robert Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense. And Robert Gates was actually the Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush. So Obama decided, since we were at war, that changing the Secretary of Defense probably wasn't the best idea. So he just kept the same guy. Sometimes presidents do that. Sometimes they go in and they change out everybody. Sometimes they keep everybody. Sometimes they pick and choose who they're going to keep and who they're going to let go. Okay? And he picked Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State. Okay? So the Secretary of Defense is in charge of the military. Secretary of Treasury is in charge of the Treasury. Okay? And the Secretary of State, she kind of has a lot of power. She is over all the ambassadors of the that are all over the world. Remember, we talked about ambassadors are somebody who goes before someone and represents them. And so we are like ambassadors for Christ, because we represent Christ if we're Christians, and we represent who he is to people who may never have met him. So ambassadors do that for the United States. They go to embassies in foreign countries. Remember, we talked about embassies are like having the American land on foreign soils, and it's considered American land wherever an embassy is. So she oversaw all the embassies and all the ambassadors, which are people who serve in the embassies and represent the United States. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So the economy was continuing to get worse under President Obama, and people started losing their houses. Remember, we learned in the last chapter that they were giving loans to people not based on if they could pay back their mortgage or not. Okay, it used to be banks had rules, and then there was people saying that those rules were racist and stuff, and so the bank had to get rid of those rules. And unfortunately, that meant that they gave money to people who couldn't pay it back, not because of their color of their skin. They just couldn't pay it back because maybe they could only afford a house that was worth, that was like a $200,000 house, but they bought a $600,000 house, or they couldn't afford a house at all and they bought one. So this became known as the mortgage bubble. Okay, the housing bubble. So what happened is banks start going under because they have too many bad mortgages, and then they have to start closing their doors. Lots of people lost their houses, but it was crazy because even people who did not miss a single payment on their house started losing their houses because the computer system or something, nobody really knows to this day what happened. But something in the computer system was sending out notices to people who, some people even had their houses completely paid off and they were getting foreclosed on. So it was just chaos and mayhem. Okay. So Obama brings in two programs to try to save people's houses because in his campaign promises, he promised that he was going to pay everybody's mortgage. Which, remember, I said a lot of people make big promises and then they don't keep any of them. So this was a promise that I knew when he made it was not possible because the U.S. government doesn't do anything to make money. They just get their money from taxes. So it's like impossible for them to be able to pay off everybody's mortgage because there just isn't enough money to do that. But he did come up with these two programs. And these two programs were to help people stay in their houses. And so the one was that if you got behind on your mortgage, there was a lot of legal stuff they had to do before they could throw you out. And the second program was that if you thought you were going to fall behind, if you were concerned about that, then what they would do is they would allow a judge to look at your case and change your mortgage payments, which put a lot of pressure on the banks as well, because kind of like the government, the bank doesn't really do anything to make their own money. I mean, they do investments and stuff, but they loan out money. So if you buy a house, they gave somebody the money for your house and they expect you to pay it back. So right now we kind of have a same kind of thing. Right now people aren't allowed to be thrown out of their houses if they can't make payments or rent payments, mortgage payments or rent payments, because of this virus thing. And they aren't having to pay payments, which again is going to put the banks in an issue, which is going to put landlords in the issue, which will put banks in the issue because a lot of landlords, people who get money from rent, okay, somebody owns the house somewhere. They aren't going to be able to pay their mortgage because their renter isn't paying them. And this is like a whole giant domino effect. I don't know, guys. Yeah, it can get really bad really fast here. All right. Okay, so at this time that they put in this program, millions and millions of people are out of work, kind of like now. And a lot of them that did have full-time jobs before only have part-time jobs. The unemployment rate was pretty big because they didn't include people who were just done looking because they were discouraged and stuff. So it was actually bigger than the numbers show. The government, Obama encouraged Congress to continue to spend money just like they had during the Bush administration with all the bailouts. So not only were they working on mortgages, but they were still doing bailouts. They were still bailing out banks and cars. People were just walking away. So I know like in Houston, Texas, people were just walking away from their houses because they couldn't afford the mortgage. Banks had more houses than they could sell. People were called upside down on their mortgage, which meant that they owed more on their mortgage than their house was worth because the house value started to drop. I know people who bought here in Hawaii because the house values dropped, and that is something that could happen again because of what's happening now. So even though he had these programs for mortgage people, a lot of people still lost their houses. So in response to the car issue, Obama came up with this thing called cash for clunkers, clunkers for cash. I think it's cash for clunkers. Where he would give, the United States government would give you money, okay, to go buy a new car. Not all the money, but they would give you some money for your car, way more than it was worth, so that you could go buy a more fuel efficient car. He hoped that by doing that, it would raise car sales, which would then pull the car companies out of their bankruptcy issues. That it didn't work. Just to let you know, none of these things actually worked. Okay, but he tried. The next thing he did was a stimulus package. And this stimulus package was $800 billion, which compared to the stimulus package now is like peanuts. But this is $800 billion. And it went to 3 areas. Okay, the $800 billion went to unemployment benefits. So when you lose your job, there's something called unemployment. But unemployment has a limit to how long you can take it for, and it's not your whole salary. It's a percentage. So say you make $1,000 a month, okay, and you lose your job. The government will pay you part of that. So if they paid 50%, they pay you $500 a month, because I can't remember the percentage, so I'm just using 50 as an idea, okay? So if they paid you 50%, you would get $500 a month, but you can only do that for a certain amount of time, a certain amount of weeks, because in that time you're supposed to be looking for a job, which is kind of why they don't give you the whole thing, because then you want to go look for another job. So what they do is they encourage you to go find another job by only giving you part of what you earned before. And so under this stimulus, the unemployment benefits kept increasing, not in the amount, but in how many weeks you got it. So maybe before this, again, I don't know, I'm just throwing out numbers. Maybe before this you got it for 4 weeks. And now the 4 weeks is over, you get nothing. Well, they kept extending it. I know at one point it was like almost a year you got it. So that is where that money went to. Tax credits. I always chuckle when they say money goes to tax credits, but that's what happened. They did tax credits, hoping that if you had more money in your pocket, you would be willing to go spend, and that would stimulate the economy. However, people were struggling to pay their house mortgage, so if you have more money in your pocket, you're going to be paying your house mortgage and not going out and spending, which could help, but it wasn't a very huge amount of money or anything. And then he had a third thing, which was like his big thing, and that did not work well either. It was called shovel-ready projects. He based it on what FDR did, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during the Depression. Remember, he started putting people to work with the civil engineering jobs and all those things. So Obama said, we have all these projects in the United States that are ready to go, and we're going to put the money toward that. In reality, those projects weren't really ready to go. So it wasn't like today we don't have it, tomorrow we do. It was like today we don't have it, a year and a half later we do. So it didn't really do anything for the immediate need. And then for a while you would see like plaques and stuff that say, this is a stimulus program. But again, it was like a year and a half later before they were able to do those things. So they weren't actually shovel ready. It will come soon. But again, he was using someone else's idea, which is not a problem. I mean, if you have a good idea, you might as well use it. I do. I use other people's ideas and stuff too. But it didn't work out as well for him. And actually, it didn't work out that well for FDR either, to be honest. A lot of economists say that FDR probably prolonged the Depression because of some of the things he did. But if you don't, look into the history, you don't know that. So that might have been what happened there. All right, so what all of these programs actually ended up doing was not stimulating the economy and putting the government into more and more debt. So if you have a deficit, you have debt, you owe somebody money, kind of like the mortgage, right? So the United States government, just like your family, has to go borrow money from somewhere. And we tended to borrow money from China. Okay, so fun fact, China holds a lot of our debt. So we pay them a lot of money every year. All right. It did not really get people back to work. It did not really save the car companies because if I remember correctly, Obama bails out the cars twice in his administration, and George W. Bush bailed them out once in his administration. So the car companies were really in trouble for a long time. Okay, and that money was supposed to be paid back, but who knows if that got paid back or not. Also, gas prices went through the roof. I mean, it was crazy. We were paying almost $5 a gallon in gas. So when you drive by a gas station, if you get out of the house, you drive by a gas station, look at the prices today. Okay, they're way lower. So when I lived in Maine, we heated our house with oil, which comes from gases, called kerosene. And the kerosene prices were getting absolutely ridiculous. We were wondering if we were going to be able to even heat our house at this time because it was just so expensive to do that at that time. All right. The next issue that he had was healthcare. So some people can't afford healthcare and some people can't afford insurance, which is a good problem to try to solve. But the way that they wanted to solve it was totally take over the healthcare plan, which they did. So what they wanted to do was they said things like you could keep your own doctor, you could keep your insurance plan if you wanted to. Those things ended up not being true. You can't keep your own doctor. You have to go to specific doctors. And you were not allowed to keep your own insurance unless you were in a small group that worked for the federal government. Everybody else had to go to some form of Affordable Care Act insurance, and the prices skyrocketed. I know they're way expensive. It was supposed to keep prices low. It was supposed to give everybody who was uninsured insurance, which if you know anybody who doesn't have insurance today, that didn't work either. His idea was to pass on the cost to the employers. So you used to have more employees to provide insurance. He made it less employees. It used to have to be full-time employees. He made it if you worked more than 32 hours and over. So a lot of employers, especially small businesses, cut all of their people down to 30 hours or 28 hours. So that healthcare initiative actually did not help people because it lost a lot of jobs and those kinds of things, which was a huge problem. So it's called the Affordable Care Act, but you might hear it called Obamacare because a lot of people renamed it Obamacare because it was Barack Obama's baby. It was his initiative. That's what I mean by his baby, not like a real baby, but anything you're really invested in is called your baby. And so he was really invested in that. And so they called it Obamacare. So businesses with 50 or more full-time employees had to provide insurance before the healthcare thing came in. And then, like I said, it went way down to, I think it was like 20 employees, but I can't remember for sure. And it was an hour. It wasn't 40 hours because people complained. They're like, but wait, some people only work 38 hours. We got to lower the number. But these people don't seem to think, well, if the company can't afford to give it to you now, how are they going to give it to you later? Because see, how it usually works is that a company will pay part of your insurance premium. Okay? So say the insurance is $500. The company might pay $100 or $400 or $500 or $300 or whatever the company decides to pay. But usually companies pay something. And so what happens is you also have to insure everybody that's there, which can also be problematic if you are like in a business that happens to have a lot of older people. So part of this healthcare plan was that they were going to make young people who weren't going to need any healthcare pay in, and President Obama said that with the young people paying in and the old people paying in but getting services, that the whole program would pay for itself. No, that didn't happen. Okay. Um, that's what they said, but that's not what happened. Um, then they said, oh, well, if you're too poor, the federal government will pay for you to have insurance, which also hasn't happened. And there were actually programs before. And he said that people who do have insurance now will see a drop in premiums. That didn't happen either. I think ours went up like 50%. So yeah, and I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people that I talk to and stuff that their insurance went way up. What it covers went way down, which is what happens when you take it to the government. And they penalize people. So if the young people, like my children who are young, don't have insurance, they would tack on. They called it a tax because when it went to the Supreme Court, they changed the word to tax, but it was a penalty before it went to the Supreme Court. And so they will penalize you for not having insurance because then you're not paying into the insurance. But some people I know, older people even, who needed health insurance, they couldn't afford the health insurance, the Health Care Act stuff. And so it was cheaper for them to pay the penalty for not having the insurance than to actually pay for the insurance. So they chose to go without insurance and pay the penalty. So this did not work out at all as promised. And a few times they've tried to repeal the Health Care Act and replace it with something better. And that was one of those times that John McCain went and voted, and so that we still have the Health Care Act. Okay. All right. So with all this stuff going on, this group of people come in and say, hey, that we're not okay with them bailing out. We weren't okay with George W. Bush bailing out. We're not okay with the out of control federal spending. We're not okay with any of this. And they call themselves the Tea Party. Now, the Tea Party, if you remember your U.S. history, in Boston, when England had put a tea tax on all tea coming into Boston, into the United States. Remember, but at this time they weren't the United States; they were the English colonies. So they were taxing the English colonies for their tea. Any tea they drank, they would tax. So what they did was they went on the ship one night and they threw all the tea into the Boston harbor, and that was called the Boston Tea Party. So this Tea Party movement took its name from the Boston Tea Party. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to change the way government did things. They wanted to pull the government out of many things, like the healthcare, like bailing out banks and car companies and doing clunkers. And they just felt that the spending of the United States government was so out of control. And they wanted to bring back fiscal conservatism is what's called, where basically you kind of, as a business, you make it or you don't make it. The government's not there to give you money and prop you up. So that's the kind of the idea behind it. Because remember, the government doesn't do anything to make money. They only get their money through taxes. So it's not like they have a product or a service that they hand out. And they also felt that the government was overstepping their bounds by doing some of these things, because in the Constitution it says that the federal government's supposed to be pretty small, that they are only supposed to do things that defend the entire country, and that the states are supposed to basically take care of everything else. And so that's what they kind of wanted to get back to. They held protests. In late February, the movement really picked up speed. It's called a grassroots movement because it started in the grass, is the idea. So it started with just the people. It wasn't like a political party. It wasn't a group of people supported by the government. These were just a bunch of people that got together, kind of like is happening now. A bunch of people getting together and saying, hey, we think you guys are taking away our rights. And some people are protesting in some states, not here in Hawaii, but in other states, because they are not acknowledging the First Amendment with a lot of the lockdown stuff that they're doing. So it's kind of starting again, okay? So this, not Tea Party, but just people getting together because we're allowed to do that, First Amendment. So they got together, and then by the next election cycle, which was 2010, because we actually have election every 2 years, but we have big elections every 4 because the president's every 4. So in the 2010 election, there were a lot of Tea Party people who got elected, and they were able to influence the election. So the House at the beginning of Obama's presidency was had more Democrats than Republicans. And then in 2010, it had more Republicans than Democrats, a lot of them coming in Tea Party people. Again, it wasn't an actual party. It wasn't like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Libertarian Party. It was just what they called themselves after the Boston Tea Party. So they were Republicans, but they were more conservative and said, hey, we got to stop bailing these people out. We got to stop all this crazy spending, okay? Sorry. All right, so let's talk about inauguration. So today we have inauguration in January for the new president, but it didn't always used to be that way. The inauguration time when the Constitution was written originally was March. Hang on, I can't tell if I wrote a 7 or a 4. I gotta put my glasses on. Okay, March 4th, 1789 was the very first inauguration. And it stayed that same day until 1933. So in 1933, we are having the Great Depression. I'm sorry, the Great Depression led to this change because the Depression is actually in the 20s, but that's good. So the Great Depression led to this change, and they actually made a change to the Constitution. The 20th Amendment says that Inauguration Day is going to be January 20th, okay? Instead of March 4th. And a lot of people wanted FDR in there more quickly because of the Great Depression, and so they changed it. So FDR was the first president to be inaugurated in January on the 20th in 1937. So I thought that was just kind of a fun fact. All right,